winter of 1878 had come down hard on the Wyoming plains, turning the land into a silent white grave. The wind screamed across the open country, cutting through wool, leather and flesh alike. Eli Carter rode with his head down, his coat pulled tight, his horse struggling through drifts that reached its knees. Eli was a man of few words, shaped by long years alone with cattle, sky and silence. He knew this land, and he knew winter killed without mercy. That was when he saw her. At first, she looked like nothing more than a dark shape half buried in snow, a fallen bundle of brush, abandoned by the storm. Eli almost rode past, almost something, instinct, conscience or plain stubbornness, made him pull the reins. He dismounted and stepped closer, boots crunching softly. She was a woman. Her black hair was stiff with ice, spread across the snow like spilled ink. Her buckskin dress was torn and thin, no match for the brutal cold. When Eli knelt, he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. Barely breathing, her skin was cold enough to sting his fingers. Apache, he realized, noticing the beadwork at her collar and the faded blue markings on her cheeks. Every story he'd ever heard told him to leave her. Apache meant trouble. Apache meant blood, but leaving her meant death. Eli shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her small frame, lifting her carefully. She was lighter than she should have been, all bone and exhaustion. He placed her across his saddle and mounted, urging his horse forward with quiet desperation. His cabin stood alone near a line of frozen pines, smoke long gone from its chimney. Inside, he laid her near the hearth and built a fire with shaking hands. He rubbed her arms, her feet speaking low. Steady words, though he didn't expect her to understand. He wasn't sure why he spoke at all. Maybe the silence felt too heavy. Hours passed. The fire crackled. The storm howled outside. Just before dawn, she stirred. Her eyes flew open, dark, sharp, filled with fear. She tried to rise, panic flaring, then collapsed back, too weak to fight. Eli stepped away at once, raising his hands. "You're safe," he said quietly. She didn't know the words, but she saw the fire, felt the warmth, and in the quiet cowboy's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. No threat, no hunger, only a man who had chosen to stop in the snow. Morning light crept through the narrow window, pale and cold, touching the rough wooden walls of the cabin. Ayanna woke slowly, every part of her aching, as if the frost had seeped into her bones. For a moment, fear seized her, and she pushed herself upright, scanning the unfamiliar space. The fire still burned low, its warmth gentle rather than threatening. The air smelled of smoke, coffee, and meat. She saw the man by the table. He stood with his back to her, moving carefully, as if aware of every sound he made. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair dusted with gray, though his face was still young. When he turned and noticed she was awake, he stopped at once. He did not approach. He only nodded, slow and respectful, and set a bowl on the table between them. Ayanna did not know his words when he spoke, but his voice carried no sharpness. Hunger finally overcame fear. She accepted the bowl with cautious hands, tasting the stew. Warmth spread through her chest, and her breath trembled as she ate. She had not realized how close to death she had been. She told him her name, touching her chest. "Ayanna." He repeated it carefully, as though the sound mattered. Then he tapped his own chest. "Eli." That was how they began. The days that followed passed quietly. Snow sealed the world outside, forcing them into an uneasy peace. Ayanna watched him closely, always alert, always ready to run. He never reached for her. When he needed to pass close, he paused, waiting for her to move first. At night, he slept on the far side of the room, his rifle resting against the wall, his back turned to her. She dreamed often, fire, screaming, horses and gunshots. Each time she woke, gasping, Eli was already awake, sitting near the fire, offering her water without a word. He never asked questions. He never pressed. As strength returned to her limbs, she began to help, grinding coffee, mending torn seams with careful fingers. She noticed the scars on his hands, the quiet sadness that lingered in his eyes. He noticed the marks on her wrists, pale lines where rope had once burned her skin. Neither spoke of them. One evening, as the sun bled red across the snow, Eli reached into a wooden chest and withdrew a folded shawl. He held it out to her, uncertain. The cloth was soft, worn thin with age. Ayana took it slowly. When she wrapped it around her shoulders, warmth flooded her chest and her eyes shone. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of deep thanks. That night the storm returned, battering the cabin walls. Inside, two wounded souls slept beneath the same roof, separated by history and pain, yet bound by a fragile trust growing stronger with every quiet hour. The sound reached Eli before the sun cleared the trees, a distant rhythm, low and steady, carried through the frozen ground. Horses, more than one. He rose from his chair by the fire, every muscle tightening, and moved to the window. Shapes emerged through the pale morning haze, riders dark against the snow. Ayana felt it too. She was on her feet instantly, fear flashing across her face. Her hand went to the small knife she kept hidden in her boot. The warmth of the cabin vanished, replaced by memories of shouting men and burning lodges. "They will take me," she said softly, her voice tight. "Or kill me." Eli turned to her, calm but unyielding. He shook his head once. "No." He reached for his coat and stepped outside before she could stop him. Cold air bit into his lungs as three men reined in their horses a short distance from the cabin. Their eyes were sharp, measuring. One wore a cavalry jacket. Another carried the casual cruelty of a bounty hunter. They spoke plainly. An Apache woman had escaped a roundup. There was money for her return. They asked if Eli had seen anyone. Eli met their stares without flinching. "Ain't no one here but me." One man's gaze drifted toward the cabin door. His horse shifted. The moment stretched thin as ice. Behind Eli, the door opened. Ayana stepped out into the cold, wrapped in the worn shawl. She stood straight despite her fear, chin lifted, eyes dark and steady. She did not hide. She did not beg. The wind tugged at her hair, but she did not move. The men froze. They had expected prey. Instead, they found a woman who had survived fire, loss, and winter itself. Something unreadable passed between them, uncertainty, perhaps, or shame. Eli moved slightly, placing himself beside her, close enough that his presence was unmistakable. "She's here by choice," he said quietly, "and she's not going anywhere." The silence that followed felt heavier than gunfire. At last, the man in the cavalry jacket spat into the snow and turned his horse. One by one, they rode away, their figures shrinking into the white distance. Ayana's knees nearly gave out when they were gone. Eli caught her elbow, steady but gentle. She looked at him, breath shaking, eyes bright with unshed tears. She touched his arm, not in gratitude alone, but in something deeper, recognition. He had stood for her when the world never had. The snow would melt. Danger would return in other forms. But in that lonely cabin, with smoke rising softly into the cold sky, two lives crossed by chance had chosen to stand together. And in the Wild West, that choice meant everything.